Hello again. I want you to think about a time that you completely lost it, right? The last time words came out of your mouth a full second before you reasonably figured out what you were actually saying. Here's what I need you to understand in this moment. It is that you're not really fully in charge, right? In these situations where you say something before you even realize it, your body is doing, your brain in this case is doing all the work. You figure out seconds sometimes after what you've actually said. Hi, my name is Dr. Carlos Todd, and I have more than 25 years of experience working with individuals who have had or dealt with the worst conflicts in their lives. And part of my work is really helping people to fight less, love more. And we're going to talk a little bit today about chemistry around conflict, right? Something called the amygdala hijack. What is the amygdala hijack, right? This is the first video in a series where I talk about the chemistry of conflict, the actual biology of what happens inside of you when you get angry in your relationship and your work. My promise over the next 10 minutes is simple. By the end, you'll understand exactly why you snapped before thought about what you were going to do. In this particular case, I'm going to give you an honest review of how to healthily move from conflict to connection. So let's talk a little bit about the science, right? The brain, right? There's this little thing inside your brain, right? So let's look inside the brain. Deep in the center, on each side, there sits a small almond-shaped cluster called the amygdala. The amygdala is like literally a Greek word for almond, right? In my Barbadian dialect, I say almond. Its main job is a threat responder. What do I mean by a threat responder? It's like kind of like a smoke alarm for the brain, right? It help you scan to kind of figure out what's dangerous and what's not. Here's the part that changes everything once you understand it. When something happens, a tone of voice changes, a facial expression, a sentence in an email, that information comes into your brain and splits down two paths. Famous neurologist Joseph Ledox call them the low road and the high road. The high road runs up to your brain, your thinking brain, the cortex, where you carefully analyze what happens. What does this actually mean? Is this a threat? What are our options? This is the smart road, but it takes too long. It's kind of slow, right? The low road is a shortcut that runs straight to the amygdala. It's crude. It only carries a rough, blurry version of the information, but it's fast. It goes there in a fraction of a second before the thinking brain has to finish its work. So the amygdala can pull the trigger button so that you have what we call a stress response. Why are we built this way? Now, why would evolution wire us this way as human beings, right? Remember, we're talking about just the chemistry, like what happens in conflict, right? Because for most of human history, that head start kept us alive, right? If there's a rustle in the grass, the person who waits to calmly kind of figure out what's going on, they're gonna die, right? They're gonna die. The person who jumps first and in that split second thinks about what they're gonna do, right? Run or fight back, they're the ones who live. Here's the problem. The amygdala is fast, but it's not smart. It cannot tell the difference between a genuine threat in your life and a threat to your ego, your competence, or your sense of being respected. A lion and a sarcastic remark, they're seen as the same thing, right? And so if the amygdala takes over, it becomes like this kind of attack, right? And that's not something that you always want to happen, especially in modern society. What do we do, right? I want you to kind of understand how this plays out in your relationship, for example. Let me make this real. I've worked with couples for, solidly for the last 10 years, but more than that. I call them a composite of hundreds of couples, right? And so what I've seen over time, I've kind of put together, and I'm sharing these ideas with you based on what I've seen over hundreds and hundreds of couples over time. One partner might ask a completely fair question. Did you think about how we were going to pay for this, right? Perfectly clear question. And before she finishes the sentence, he has already defended himself. Sharp, loud, and he shuts down. To her, it looks like he's overreacting on purpose, like he doesn't care. To him, it's genuinely felt as an attack. He has to survive. Here's what's actually happening. Her tone maybe a little chip because she's stressed, right? A little chip on the shoulder, a little edgy, right? That hits his low road. Remember, the high road and the low road, right? His amygdala reads it as you're being criticized for failing and processes this as a threat. He hasn't chosen to be defensive. His alarm just went off. It was a reaction to that threat, not necessarily a reaction to her. And of course, her alarm reads it as defensiveness, as a threat. And now these two ancient smoke detectors are screaming at each other over the question of the electric bill. It's just a simple situation, but it extends into this attack defend. And if you don't really understand what is happening and that you need to pull back, you're going to find yourself in a situation where you're having this really escalating conflict. What happens at work? Now watch the same machinery, the high and the low road, in a completely different setting. You're a competent professional. You get 2 words from your boss, right? We need to talk. That's it. No context. And your heart is pounding. Your stomach drops. You've mentally rewritten your resume before lunch over a message that might be about a holiday party. That's the amygdala hijack that's going on in your brain. The same thing happens in the meeting where someone challenges an idea that you have. You feel your face get flushed, and you ready yourself to be defensive. In this state, people say things that end up ending relationships, working against them, not because they're unprofessional, because of 6 seconds, 6 tiny seconds. The professional part of that individual goes offline, and that smoke alarm begins to run the meeting. Remember, that smoke detector. What is the mistake that most people make? Here's where most people go wrong, and it goes in one or two directions. The first is shame. What is wrong with me? Why do I keep doing this? And they pile guilt on anger and pile guilt on top of anger, but guilt is just another threat signal. So now the alarms are going off, and they're fueling that sense of anger, and they're fueling that sense of being threatened. The second wrong turn is the opposite. It's blame. So on one side we have shame, and the other side we have blame. He made me so angry. She pushed my buttons. And I understand that feeling, but we gotta be careful here. The moment you say someone else made you feel something, you've handed them the remote control of your entire nervous system. So you made me feel this way. Once you say that, then what happens is that the person now is in control. You've made yourself powerless. The truth is more uncomfortable, and there are much more feelings that are going on there that one may be considering. But you really need to be careful with this idea of blame and really put yourself back in control. So what do? How do we fix this? How do we address this? You need to be able to take a little bit more control over what happens with the amygdala. You can't really stop the amygdala hijack, but you can do something to mitigate it. The amygdala is literally faster than your conscious thought. And anyone who tells you, just stay calm, has never genuinely been flooded. And there really are not a lot of people who have not really been flooded with that flood of emotions. So you can't really stop it, but you can shorten it. And the tool is much more simple than you might realize. In the moment, you feel this thing rising. You can say to yourself, silently, right? You're saying it in your head, right? That's my alarm system going off. That's not the whole truth. I like to say that there's something missing, something I'm not seeing, something I'm not understanding. Here's why this works. It's not just a nice idea. The brain imaging researcher, Matthew Lieberman, who studies what happens to people who put feelings into words, he's found that this simple act of labeling an emotion, I'm angry, that's my alarm, actually reduce activity in the amygdala, right? So being able to say, I feel embarrassed, right? This changes things. Naming the feeling is not fluffy. And one of the things I tell folks is really just understand that the expression of feelings oftentimes is being able to name it. It gives you a lot more control. And feelings are not just about crying, the feelings are also about just expressing what's going on in your head. Precisely. I feel alone, disconnected, fearful, whatever it is, right? Using the actual words, right, help to turn the volume down in this alarm system and put you in much more control. So what's the harder truth? The harder truth is that you're gonna get hijacked again. Maybe this week, maybe next week. Understanding the amygdala does not give you a force field. The trigger is faster than you. It always will be, right? It's just the way how our brain is made up. So if the goal is never to get angry, you're gonna fail, right? That's not my goal. My goal is not for you to not get angry. The real goal is the gap, that space between what's happening, and you figuring it out. There's a gap between the trigger and your response. All right, now, for most of us, the gap is basically zero, right? There's no daylight there. There's a spark and there's an explosion, and that's it. Everything I teach you about is about widening the gap, right? Making that gap wider and wider. A quarter second becomes 2 seconds. 2 seconds becomes 6 seconds, and you have that little bit of time to think. It is in this gap that you're going to find some freedom. Viktor Frankl said it better than I think I could. Between the stimulus and response, there's a space, and in that space is your power of choice, or the power to choose. The amygdala owns the stimulus. Can't stop that. Your whole character, your whole sense of control rests in that space between the stimulus and the response. What's the final verdict here? So let's bring it home a little bit. When conflict hits, that little small almond-shaped organ inside the brain, and you get that first signal, a crude response, right? Your response really is to create that space. Your response is to ask the question, what is going on here? What am I feeling? And what do I need to do in this moment? So the next thing in this series, right? Next time in this series, we're gonna go down 2 steps, right? The 2 chemicals in your body, right? The 2 systems in your body dump these 2 chemicals called adrenaline and cortisol. And we're going to talk a little bit more about why after 10, 15, 20 minutes you're still kind of shaking, right? You're still feeling like you're not in control. So that's what we're going to tackle next time. What I want you to also consider is that in my book Fight Plan, I talk about this idea of the stimulus response and what do. It's really, really important to remember or consider that what happens in your relationship in terms of conflict is going to be decided based largely on the skills that you have, right? It's going to be decided on the extent to which you're able to effectively figure out in this moment what's the best approach. It's really not about who's right and who's wrong. It's what's the best approach first to handling this. How do I mentally be clear enough to see exactly what's going on? So that's the goal. This is a little bit of a longer video, and then the videos in this series are going to be somewhat longer, but I wanted to kind of share with you more from a technical standpoint what's going on at work and in your relationship. Thanks so much for watching this video, and I will see you in the next one where we continue to talk about how to fight less, love more. And remember to visit me at masteringconflict.com, masteringanger.com for more. All right, you take care, and we'll talk soon.